2. All right. Hey, welcome back to episode number 37. I've got Dr. Matt Townsley, who is an assistant professor of educational leadership at the University of Northern Iowa, otherwise known as UNI around these parts. So, Dr. Townsley, Matt, what do you usually go by?
Please, Matt, please. I can't even get my kids to call me Dr. Dad. So please, Matt, Jared, you bet.
So we were talking a little bit before the show here, before I kind of share some of your biography, but we were talking before the show. We actually have some common friends that we go back a ways to. You graduated from Wartburg in 2004, is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And I was over at UNI, Northern Iowa, 2004, and a roommate of yours named Ben Jones from your freshman year. Actually, he left you guys and came and roomed with me my sophomore year. He left Wartburg, came over to UNI, made the switch.
Here's one thing I remember about Ben Jones. This guy shows up. He shows up to college, all right? And in his closet, like you got the clothes and stuff, the shelf above his closet is like a huge bag of chips. It's like he went to Sam's Club and just bought this guy loved chips and salsa. I'm sure you know that about him too, Jared, but wow, he's a great guy, really big into soccer, probably still coaching and doing great things.
Yeah, I think he's still coached up at Minnesota State University up in Mankato. I normally don't try to go down the path too much here for some obscure little friend in general, but I just felt like just a crazy coincidence. And again, it's funny because he came to UNI and now you're at UNI and we'll get into that. So basically long story short there is that we both were about 15 minutes apart down the road from each other, getting our educational degrees there. And then our paths are crossing once again. So, Matt, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but you're the co-author of a newer book called Making Grades Matter, which I'm excited to jump into. Before being an assistant professor, you were the director of instruction and technology at Solon. Yes. Here in Eastern Iowa. And then before that, a math teacher. And last but not least, I'm going to let you take it over from here for a little bit. In 2017, you were the Iowa Central Office Administrator of the Year. So a very cool honor. So Matt, why don't you just take a few minutes, take us through the progression of math teacher to administrator to assistant professor. And I'm really curious, not many people go from K through 12 to the college, to teaching in college. So just share a little bit about the journey you've had.
Yeah, you bet. So in high school, it's crazy. This teacher I really looked up to, he was a social studies teacher, Jared. Like he was a social studies teacher. And I thought I want to be just like him and be a social studies teacher. Here's the thing though. When I went to Wartburg, I kind of found out or thought like, it's kind of hard to get a job, or at least at the time, harder to get a job as a social studies teacher. And I really liked math. And so I said, well, if I'm going to get a job after college, I better, maybe land in an area that I can for sure get a job in. So that's how I kind of landed in the whole area of high school math. Well, I was teaching math, just did what a lot of educators do, right? Go back to school, get a master's degree, get paid more money, all that stuff. So went and got a graduate degree. And my brother at the same time, who was older than me, also went to Wartburg, also a math teacher, kind of following his footsteps. He was going back to UNI to get his ed leadership credential. I'm like, no way, bro. Like, I'm not doing that. Cause like leadership is tough. And it's hard enough working with kids, like working with adults too. No way. So he was getting his leadership credential at UNI the exact same time I was getting my master's degree in something else at Iowa State. But this position opened up in Solon, no joke. It was a district office position. It was overseeing a lot of different programs, like Title I, special education, curriculum, all that stuff. And I thought, you know what? If there is a position, and I loved being a teacher in Solon. I just loved it. I loved the community. I loved the parents, the kids, my coworkers. I thought, if I'm going to stick around here a while, this would be a position I'm interested in. So long story short, applied, got the job. And the first thing they said, after I got the job was, you got to go back and get your leadership credential. So I enrolled once again in my brother's footsteps at UNI and got my leadership credential. So I followed him at Wartburg at math education, followed him at UNI and got my leadership credential. And obviously it was a good thing. Learned a lot about leadership, helped me grow as an educator in Solon. And then I just kind of like, I don't know, I got really excited about continuing my education, took a year off, and thought, you know what, maybe I just need to go back and get a doctorate. Like if I'm going to do it now, only had one kid at the time, like I'm going to do it now and just like try to get out of the way, knowing that maybe someday could open up another door. Well, I did it. I got that. And while I was doing that, ran into some other educational leadership professors here in Iowa, you know, like around like SAI conference type of stuff. And one of them reached out to me and said, have you ever thought about doing some adjunct teaching? I'm like, well, you know, be kind of fun. So started doing that for another university. I won't name their name, but you know, great place. And I just kind of got like the itch. I'm like, wow, this could be kind of cool. That same professor, okay, it was Trent Grundemeyer, Drake. And Trent's like, hey, you know, hey, I've got some colleagues, they're doing this grading thing. You're interested in grading. Your school, they want to research grading, and became like this research partnership. So here I am like doing some research, doing some adjuncting stuff while I've got a full-time job in district office leadership. And so I kind of got the itch for higher education while working in Solon. And I thought, you know what, that's going to be like a retirement job for me. And then a position opened up at UNI, which I absolutely love my time there in getting my leadership credential. And I just found out, you know what, there's only about 13 or so educational leadership faculty positions around the entire state. And so this position opened up, I thought it's either now or like literally wait a while until something might open up. And so I applied for the job, and as it turns out, here I am in my third year at UNI, teaching future principals, superintendents, and so forth. It's a wonderful place to be. Looking forward to telling you more about it a little bit later, Jared.
So you covered a lot of cool things there. Trent is a guest coming up here next month, by the way. So I know you guys are at competing colleges now, but we'll put that aside for now, and we'll say Trent's a good guy for sure. Matt's a good guy. Yes. So you mentioned your brother. Now, who's your brother? Is he in the state of Iowa? Is that still, or there's a lot of Townsleys out there. So I want to make sure who that is. Who's your brother?
So my brother Eric, he actually has Eric Townsley. He actually has some ties to South Taylor there, as you probably know, Jared. He started his leadership journey as the middle school principal there. Also been a building administrator in the College Community School District, and now is currently a district office administrator over there at College Community. So yeah, kind of a joke, like the Townsley's education and social media for Iowa we're out there, I guess.
And you mentioned one kid at the time. You've got more than obviously by that statement. How many kids do you have at home now?
Yeah, we've got almost a full basketball team. We've got four kids, 3 boys and a girl, from third grade on down to almost 2. Keep us busy, Jared. That's for sure.
So we are going to come back to that, because it's got to be difficult with everything that you're doing, with the writing, with some of the consulting, the speaking, the teaching, how you keep that all straight. We will come back to that. So you talked about the leap from K-12 education to the university level. Let's get to when people say your name, and the one thing that goes along with you in the state of Iowa, if not, really the country, is standards-based grading. Like you are one of the leading names out there, experts. So I'm going to take it to, these are going to be some basic questions for you to start. Okay. You're going to think you're back in first grade of standards-based grading here, but what is the Matt Townsley definition of standards-based grading?
Yeah. So many of us grew up in this points and percentages based environment, right? Where a B plus is just a few percentages different than a B, which is just a few percentage points different than a B minus. But that really doesn't tell us a whole lot about learning. And so standards-based grading is a philosophy or a way of grading that really disaggregates and better communicates exactly what students have learned and what they have not learned. The best way to think about it is this. From a communication perspective, it's kind of like a scouting report, right? Coaches go out and do scouting, and they don't come back and say, well, this basketball player, this volleyball player is a B minus. No, there's very specific information about the athlete that lands on a scouting report. And so that's really what standards-based grading is. It's a scouting report, what's where the student has learned well and where they still need to learn better. From a philosophical standpoint, standards-based grading is much more about learning than it is about earning. And again, you and I both grew up as students, probably you and I both, as teachers, we dished out the points, and the currency of our classroom was points. That's why students will ask, what do I have to do to get my grade up? Is there a Christmas crossword puzzle this year? Can I bring Kleenex boxes to get more points? I mean, all those things are because the currency of our classrooms tends to be about points or earning rather than learning. And I just want to make it clear, Jared, you know this already. It's not anyone's fault that this is the way it is. We've just all inherited this system. Historically, as we look at grading, it's been a lot more about sorting students than it is really communicating the extent to which students have learned it. And so I think sometimes when we read these books or we hear these speakers, like it can seem for us as educators like, oh my gosh, you're attacking me. And I don't see it that way. I just see it as it's different. And when we know better, we hopefully will do better. And so that's why I like to frame it around the whole scouting report and learning rather than earning. And we'll talk more perhaps a little bit later about what it looks like in schools and how to make that happen for schools that are thinking about it. Listen to this podcast.
So you obviously have a deep passion. I mean, you spent, I've seen your stuff on Twitter. I've seen the list of presentations you've been doing back to, the last 5-6 years. If you were able to pinpoint where this passion came from for the topic, are you able to go back and find one turning point where you're like, this is what I want to learn more about. This is what I want to teach people about? What would that be?
Probably about a dozen years ago or so. I was at the state math teacher conference, and I had a choice to make. Would I go to lunch early, or would I go to like this breakout session on how to fix your broken gradebook? So I obviously picked that one. And it wasn't like the whole kit and caboodle of what I now know as standards-based grading, but it was just like a quarter turn for me. It was just a quarter turn in thinking about how to grade differently. And then as I came back, I talked to my principal at the time, and he gave me permission to do that quarter turn in my classroom as a math teacher. And then as I started to do that quarter turn, I started taking, more quarter turns and more quarter turns. And then thankfully, I was literally out in the parking lot one day, a couple months later, talking to a teacher teaching next door to me. And he was kind of frustrated with this idea of, learning versus earning in his classroom. And he felt like the currency of his classroom was really more about points than it was about learning. And he had a few years of experiences all in teaching, and he was like ready to quit teaching because he felt like all he did was chase kids around for their missing assignments. So he was doing the work so that he could create more work for himself to grade it. And he's like, this is just absolutely silly. And so we had a conversation in the parking lot at Solon High School one day about this thing that I was doing. So he got on board. We just encouraged each other. And so Sean Cornally, I know you're one of those leaders at Iowa Big right now in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. If you're listening to this podcast, I just want to thank you again for the way that you encouraged me to think differently about grading. And so it really was that math teacher conference. It really was that conversation I had with my principal. And it really was that parking lot conversation with educator Sean Cornally out there.
So I've worked in districts, a few different districts where we've been kind of at different stages with standards-based grading. You mentioned Solon, the district you were in. I mean, that's one of the districts in the state that people look at and say, they're all in. They're doing it, they're doing everything across the board. Here in our district, which is like a lot of districts, I feel like we're doing bits and pieces of standards-based. You see standards-based at the elementary. You see standards-based going up into middle school. But then as you get into high school, we still are kind of driven by that the grading scale, the A's and B's. So my question to you is, what is the biggest challenge for districts who want to move from the traditional way of grading to standards-based grading?
I think that's a really good question, by the way. And just off the top of my head, Jared, there's maybe two things that come to mind. One of them is to just acknowledge that there is a fear of the unknown, right? Like we have all experienced grading in that way that I described earlier, points and percentages. There are many successful, awesome teachers who have taught and just done a great job of helping kids learn in a points and percentage system. And there are parents who were successful in the points and percentage system. And so when we talk about moving away from the points and percentage system, there legitimately is a fear of the unknown, right? Like, how are we going to do GPAs? How are we going to do scholarships? Are students still going to be motivated to turn in their homework? Or is it going to create more work for me as a teacher? There's all these questions that come up. And so really it's fear of the unknown. Secondly, is that some schools or some teachers get so focused on the particulars and lose focus on the principles. And so, sometimes we get so focused in on, well, we have to do this specific thing because I read about it in a book, or this specific thing because I saw it on Twitter. How does that really relate to the principle of making my classroom or my school more about learning rather than earning? You can read books by Bob Marzano, you can read books by Tom Guskey or Ken O'Connor, and they're going to debate some of the intricacies of how to do this thing. And I think they're all wonderful. I have my perspectives and my opinions, but sometimes the particulars get in the way of the principles. And so that's also a challenge for schools because they honestly have not necessarily laid out their principles, their rationale, their reason for transitioning to standards-based grading. And so as I think about schools that really have done this well, to borrow a Simon Sinek, they start with their why. And their why often is we want to do a better job communicating students' learning. And that becomes their number one principle, is the purpose of our grade book or the purpose of our report card is to communicate students' current levels of learning. And as a result of that, now we're going to put these specific, practices into place. And so it's really challenging, I think, for some school leaders, for some teachers, to think about overcoming the fear of the unknown and also how to focus on those principles first and then get to the particulars.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier in that answer, GPA, scholarships, class rank, all of those things. So one of the questions I had written down, I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts on, because you've been at K-12 and now you're at the university level. And a lot of people in K-12 say, well, we can't do standards-based grading because the colleges and universities, it just doesn't translate. They're too entrenched in their ways. So you have the unique perspective of now living that life and seeing what's going on at a large university, 15,000 plus kids or something like that. What is your thoughts when people say that we're being held back because of colleges? And then maybe also share, what are you seeing at college? Are you seeing some more of traditional grading practices? Or are you seeing maybe some practices that are being a little bit more redefined?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer your second question first there, Jared. As a university professor, I have a chance to interact and to talk with some of my fellow professors. And as it turns out, just this semester, I did a 2-part series with some other professors across UNI about how to think differently about their grading practices. I'm not saying all, not hundreds of professors are showing up for these things, but there are a number of professors that are interested in really making their classroom more about learning than earning. Like university professors, as it turns out, are also frustrated that even undergraduate and graduate students they just want the points. And so I think there's a very slow and perhaps undocumented movement towards changing grading practices at the college university. But let's be honest, it's not going to change overnight, just like it's not going to change overnight in K-12. And You know, a colleague once told me change at the university level, like, I mean, there's glaciers that move faster than change sometimes at the university level. Like, it's a huge organization, and change just looks a lot differently at a university that does a K-12. To go back to your first question though, I hear that question a lot as I work in high schools, as I do meetings with parents, as they ask questions. I mean, so your question is just spot on. A couple things come to mind. First of all, it's this. What does instruction look like? What does grading look like at the university level? And there's lecture halls, right? There's huge lecture halls of hundreds of students at the University of, big University of Iowa, for example, right? And so, would we agree that that's not the best way to teach students, right? Like that'd be like at South Tama High School. Let's put all of the sophomores together in the gym, and I mean, first of all, can't do that because of COVID, but let's put all the sophomores in the gym together and just lecture all for 65 minutes to them on biology. Like, no way, like that's terrible instruction. And so there's a ton of things we do differently in K-12 because we know better. And so a colleague of mine, not a colleague, a researcher friend of mine, Dr. Tom Guskey, says the best thing we should be doing in K-12 is to teach excellently today. And so that's our goal, is to teach excellently today in K-12 because we know it's the best thing to do. I mean, if we really took that line of thinking in the other direction, we'd be having middle school kids get together for lock-ins on the weekend to get them ready for residential life in college. Like that's silly. We would never do that, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things we do in K-12 because we know they're better. Secondly, from like a, kind of a less humorous perspective and a more like empirical perspective, a couple colleagues and I, actually, Dr. Tom Guskey and Dr. Tom Buckmiller and I, we have a paper coming out probably by the end of this year where we actually took the time to survey and interview university students at the end of their freshman year. And as it turns out, you're right, they do have some challenges as it relates to transitioning from being a high school senior to being a college freshman. But their experiences with standards-based grading, because those are the students we focused in on for our paper, that's not the problem. That's not the number one problem they note in their transition. There's social issues and there's all kinds of other things that come up. But standards-based grading, as it turns out, is not one of them. And so looking forward to disseminating that research and hopefully kind of dispelling or, maybe debunking that myth that if we mess with high school kids grading, it's going to somehow mess with them in college. It's just frankly not true.
You got a book when did your book come out? And you co-authored it with, tell us a little bit about the book, when it came out, who it's co-authored with, and then I got a question for you.
Sure, yeah. So our book, Making Grades Matter, Standards-Based Grading in a Secondary Professional Learning Community at Work, came out in mid-March, like right before the pandemic hit us here in the United States. And you can check it out on Solution Tree or Amazon, both on there. My co-author is Nathan Weir. Nathan Weir is currently Associate Superintendent, Chief Academic Officer in the Linn-Mar School District. And Nathan was at the time high school principal at Solon. So I was district office, he was high school principal, and we worked together. Did a lot of just great work in trying to make these grading practices, these principles come alive at the high school level. I could talk more about it, but to make a long story short, Jared, we never thought we were going to write a book. It just kind of happened thanks to some encouragement from some other authors out there.
So you mentioned, you've mentioned Guskey a few times, correct? O'Connor, Wormley, there's a lot of these guys who have their books out there about grading, standards-based. In every book that comes out, and I'm sure you thought about this, has to have a little bit different approach, or a little bit, maybe present something that's new. And I apologize. Usually I try to read the books before I meet with the guests, and I'm just so far behind on other previous guests that I haven't had a chance to catch up yet. I'm going to order your book. I'm going to read it. I haven't had a chance yet. But what makes your book different?
Sure, yeah. By the way, there's a ton of great grading books out there. I think ours is a little bit unique in that there are books that talk about why we need to change grading practices. There are other books that talk about how to change grading practices. But almost all of those how books really frame it around a K-12 perspective. Jared, just a few moments ago, you asked me some very specific questions about high school that really don't come up if we're changing our grading practices in elementary or the middle school. And so our book specifically is geared towards secondary educators, middle school and high school teachers, administrators, district office folks. And we also wrote it to be in like a book study format. So at the end of every chapter, so like the second chapter, for example, talks about how to think differently about homework. And so at the end of that chapter, an individual teacher kind of fills out like a self-assessment. Where am I at in my homework practices? And then we hope that they will read it alongside someone else, like maybe, the high school science team reads it together, or the building leadership team reads it together. And then there's also a place for a team to reflect. How are we doing together in this specific area? And then as a result of kind of self-assessment, there's an action planning template. So it's not just like, here's prescriptively how to do it, but it's more of a self-assessment tool along the way. And I think that makes it unique as well, because it really prescribes next steps for secondary educators, no matter where they're at in their journey.
So you mentioned the book is available. Like if people want to get the book, you mentioned Solution Tree. Can you get it on Amazon, or is there other places to get it? What would you recommend?
Yeah, Solution Tree has it, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think even Walmart carries every once in a while. Also for the Iowa educators, maybe that are listening here, Central Rivers AEA has it in their media services library. And there's a number of others of kind of like local public university type libraries. If anyone heads up to University of Northern Iowa, we have it there as well, Wartburg College Library, if you want to try before you buy type of thing.
Okay, so and I've got lots more to get to. We spent the last like 20 plus minutes on standards-based grading. Besides reading Making Grades Matter, of course, that'd be the first thing to do. But if a school district's interested, but not really sure where to start, what would you recommend?
Yeah, there's just a really great article. It's a short read, freely available, called Starting the Conversation About Grading by Sue Brookhart. And she really talks about some key questions that schools should be asking themselves, like what is the purpose of grading our school? And some key questions schools should not be asking, like, what should the grade book look like? Like that's a good question to ask, but it's not one of the first ones to ask. I think another great resource out there is Tom Guskey's Get, Set, Go. It just came out around the same time that Making Grades Matter. And it's more geared towards like school leaders and leadership teams to think about kind of a step-by-step process for making this change. Obviously, you mentioned Making Grades Matter. The final chapter of that book digs into specific steps that schools could do as well. From just kind of a bigger picture process, though, once a school clarifies their purpose of grading, they might then establish several key principles. And I'm a big fan of piloting with early adopters, right? Like at some point in time, whatever book you read is going to be not helpful anymore. At some point in time, if you go to the conference, like the people speak at that conference aren't going to be helpful anymore. And so developing some type of internal capacity through some early adopting, like a pilot group, I've found to be really a helpful practice. So latch onto one of those books I mentioned, latch onto one of those articles I mentioned, grab Ken O'Connor's How to Grade for Learning 4th edition and try out some of those things in the classroom, see how it goes, and then just start troubleshooting. I think that's a really great first step for schools to try out.
All right, man. Hey, I'm going to switch it up here a little bit. Let's go a little bit broader with educational leadership. Now you're in this role. For those of you who, most of you listen to the podcast audio on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but I started doing these on YouTube, and I'm going to probably upload this one to YouTube. If you can see the video, we've got in the background, we've got hashtag UNI Ed Lead. We got the Panther, the purple and gold. Just tell us a little bit about the programs that UNI offers and what sets UNI apart from other programs.
You bet. Our educational leadership program, we have at any given time, usually over 100 students in our principalship program in their first or second year. We also have at any given time, maybe, 30 or 40 students in our superintendent program. We also offer a doctorate program as well. I think a couple things make our programs unique. One of them is that all three of those programs are in a cohort format. And so, you enroll in the program, you start, whenever you start, you're gonna be with those same learners over the course of several years. And so you get to know them. And, we were remote before online was cool in COVID. When I was in the UNI program back in the day, we were over the ICN. I think the ICN rooms are gone by now. So we're on Zoom. And so we've got cohort formats. We bring our leaders to campus, depending upon the program, several times throughout the program to have, kind of a mix of cohort bonding through Zoom and also cohort face-to-face bonding as well. In our principalship program, in addition to the cohort format and in the remoteness, we've got this really awesome thing called Day in the Office. All right. So if you can imagine these actors and actresses coming in and acting as if they're a frustrated parent or a coach or a teacher and playing out these scenarios under the spotlight for future principals at their fictitious principal desk. All right. And our leaders are sweating, experiencing authentic learning for, 10, 15 minutes, and then we debrief it. And that's just a highlight. As we survey our graduates, like they will talk about Day in the Office being the number one highlight in our principalship program. Another great thing in our program is we have, future leaders from around the state doing these practicum experiences, with a sitting superintendent or a sitting principal, and we go out and visit them in the schools. We also have some internship advisors that go and visit them in the schools, and so there's just a ton of experience that takes place in the schools in actual leadership positions. But Jared, I'd just be remiss if I didn't share one more thing. We have practitioners that are in our program, right? So, I was a former school leader. I could just go down the list of the faculty in our program that they're not just, people that have thought about this stuff. They're people that have experienced this, whether it's, Tim Gilson talking about school law, Denise Shares talking about what it means to be a superintendent. There's just a ton of people with a ton of great experience. Crap, we got, people like Jerry Vivaberg and Carol Montz that they were awesome superintendents and principals, now retired. They're out there supporting our future principals in their internship experience. Like there's just a ton of expertise. And then, I just feel so passionate about this topic. And then we bring in like awesome guest speakers like you, Jared. They're just laying down your experience with our future leaders as well. Like it's a wonderful experience for our future school leaders to hear from the excellence of sitting and former school administrators.
So we've got a lot of aspiring administrators who listen. I got two questions for you. Number one is, when do your programs start up again? Now, and two, if somebody's on the fence of, like you were, I don't know if I wanted to go into ed leadership, I don't know if this is for me, what question or what should they think about?
Yeah, so our principalship programs start every August, and so we're recruiting already for next August. Our superintendent programs start in January, so we're just finalizing our group for January that's starting up, and our doctorate programs start every 2 years in August. So August of 2022 will be our next cohort. For those that are on the fence and just wondering, I think two things come to mind. One is to reach out to someone who is in the program or recently graduated. That was my experience. Like I had to call up my brother and be like, Eric, tell me about this. And he's like, well, here's all these awesome things I learned, these awesome experiences. He's like, you need to contact Nick Pace, who was a professor at the time at UNI. So I called up Nick Pace, and he of course was a great commercial for UNI ed leadership at the time. And so just to find someone who has been a part of the program, I think is really helpful in finding out what the advantages and disadvantages are. And then secondly, just to look at that person who is in school leadership and not to critique them like, oh, I think I could do it better, but just to look at that person and say, what is it that they're doing that I also would find value in doing? For me, like I just didn't see myself sitting in the principal's seat and doing kind of the student discipline thing. But I did see myself in the seat of overseeing like programs like curriculum and technology. And so I knew the specific seat I didn't want to see myself in and the specific seat that I could see myself in. And so I think that's just a great question for those that maybe are on the fence about a leadership program.
Okay, I got 3 more administrator from your perspective questions here. The first question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge 2020? Okay, and my natural reaction would be, well, COVID will be the biggest challenge, but let's put that aside for now. And you're nodding your head like, yeah, I realize that. But what's the biggest challenge facing new school administrators?
Focus, without a doubt, focus, Jared. I absolutely love when my phone rings or I get a text from one of our recent graduates who says, "Oh my gosh, I've got this thing going on." And I'll talk to them. And as it turns out, it's not just that thing that's going on. It's a whole list of other things that are also going on that are getting away of that one thing that's going on. And so focus, right? I mean, you mentioned COVID. We've got, the transition to remote teaching. How do I build a positive school culture when my, teachers are at home in an online environment? I mean, even though the Common Core is still, 10 years old in Iowa, it's still a big deal. We've got these reading tests. We've got this focus on career and technical education. I mean, there's just so much stuff out there right now for school leaders. I'm finding it's not any one of those. It's just a matter of focusing in on one or two of those at a time. And the busyness of school leadership is challenging for us to take enough time that's necessary to actually focus on any one of those at a given time. There's a great book that's actually called Focus by Mike Schmoker. And it's more of like what should we focus on in the area of curriculum and instruction. But I really think that the focus, no pun intended, of that book is that school leaders ought to be prioritizing their time on one or two things and doing those things at a high level. I'm not naive enough to say it's easy to do, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges for school leaders today.
So the next question, I hope I didn't steal it from you, because the next question is, what is one piece of advice you have for new school administrators? So besides focus on one or two areas, what would be that piece of advice you'd give your new grads?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jared. Crazy thing is I didn't know the answer to this until almost the last day I was employed in the Solon School District. One of my instructional coaches walked up to me and said, "Hey, man, I just want to let you know how appreciative I was of your follow through." And she says, "I will never forget, Matt. I would be in a meeting and you would pull out this little pocket notepad. And anytime I had a question, you would write down that, that question of concern." Because I honestly was not that great at, a to-do list on my phone. And I was always getting pelted with questions I didn't know the answers to. And so I would pull out this little notebook thing and I would write down that question, that thing I didn't know the answer to. And I would do my darndest to let someone know within 48 hours what my concern, what the follow-up was to that specific concern. And if my follow-up was I'm still working on it, it was as simple as stopping by that teacher's room or sending that instructional coach an email and just saying, "Hey, I don't know the answer to that." And so my advice is follow through, whatever your follow through looks like, and make it visible. That instructional coach told me that she knew whenever I pulled out that notepad that I was going to follow through because she had seen it happen time and time again. The notebook, follow through.
I love that answer. You probably saw me pulling out my cell phone here. One of our previous guests, Dr. Paul Gosman over there at Sioux City, huge on follow through. So if anybody wants to get doubled down on some advice about following through, check out episode 15. I know he talks about it there. He served as my mentor coming into superintendency, and he said exactly like you did. I mean, you will earn a lot of trust and respect. For whatever reason, it just seems like for some people struggle with follow through, no matter what level you're at. And it seems like it's a simple thing, but I love how you brought that up. I can just picture you having that notebook out, following through, and people knowing Matt's going to get stuff done. If you say, he's not going to forget about it. He's going to document it and he's going to follow through. So I love that. Okay. Last question for you in terms of the leadership stuff. Okay. So we know, I get texts every March, April, May. I get texts from people who just can't get their foot in the administrative door. I've got, for whatever reason, I must be, I've kind of shared some of my struggles in the past. And I get that question a lot. And what would you say? I mean, you see it all the time. You said you've got 100 administrators in the program at one time. And certainly there's some of those people who are going to struggle to get that admin job. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, it's kind of cliche, but maybe not cliche, but it's cliche when I think about it because it makes so much sense, is fit. And I'll never forget applying for teaching jobs back in the day, right? Like when I was applying for teaching jobs, I would create like this exact same cover letter and just send it out to every single school. That was silly. But yet sometimes that's the mentality for applying for administrative jobs. And there is absolutely no excuse in 2020 to not research the heck out of that school and out of that community. What I mean by that is if you want to get a job in South Tama, I mean, you could get on South Tama's social media. You can find the newspaper online. And I would go so far as I'm going to drive to Tama and I'm going to go to the Casey's and I'm going to pick up a hard copy of that paper. And I'm going to talk to the people that are inside Casey's working or they're picking up a donut and ask them about the school district. I'm going to drive maybe and even get my hair cut at the local hairdresser and ask them what they think about it. I mean, there's just absolutely no excuse. I'm going to call up, somebody I found out who has the last name Townsley that happens to live in South Tama, who's not even really my relative. But if I call them up and say my last name's Townsley and their last name's Townsley, then maybe they'll talk to me and find out more about it. Like I probably got a great aunt or something, 3 times removed that has a veterinarian or something that lives in South Tama. I better leverage that. It's not just a cover letter. And I know that when you're going to advertise for a position in your district, Jared, you're going to get a lot of applicants. And you want people that want to be there because that's a big time hire. By the time you go through onboarding, and helping them fit in and understanding the culture, you want someone who's going to come and hit the ground running. And so in 2020, there is absolutely no excuse that we can't investigate, understand what that school and community is all about. And we can understand for our sake if that's going to be a good fit for us.
Oh gosh, that's great. Anybody who's listening out there, so right. Matt is, it's just amazing. And we're talking administrative hires here. Every hire is important, paras, teachers, it doesn't matter, but I'm always amazed, and you're going to know what I'm going to say here, but when we have applicants who come in, it may be we do screeners all the time. We'll bring 10 people, we'll do 10 screeners on our TV screen here in my office and 30-minute screeners, and we'll ask them to tell us what you know about our district. And some people going for these principal positions that are, pretty important in my mind, have no clue, haven't done any research. And I'm like, how much do you really want this job? So I love what you're saying. And that idea of, I was just laughing about the Casey's, because there's definitely, you could walk into Casey's here in Toledo and there's always the morning coffee club. And now I don't know if they're meeting still, but you could certainly ask them and they'll share everything about the community with you. So that was an awesome answer there, Matt. Appreciate that. Let's shift gears now. And before we do that, just a reminder, this is Dr. Matt Townsley, author, speaker, assistant professor, former administrator. This is episode 37. So and Matt's doing an awesome job here. And we're gonna transition into some what I call quick hitters here. And sometimes they're quick. Sometimes we take a few more minutes on these. But I just love hearing the responses to some of these things. And now, Matt, where are you living at these days? Are you up in Cedar Falls? Or are you still commuting, or where are you at?
Yeah, so my wife and I, when I took this job at UNI in Cedar Falls, we decided to relocate back in Waverly, kind of have this 24/7 nostalgia with Wartburg College here. So yeah, I live in Waverly, wonderful place. It's about a 20-minute drive from Cedar Falls, so not too far at all.
So And a lot of us do make a lot of people in the Midwest or in Iowa do make their way to the Cedar Valley area. Waverly is absolutely a hidden gem. I mean, a lot of people know Waverly, but all right, man, I've been there a number of times, but I'm curious what you think. What is one place you got to check out in Waverly?
Two things come to mind if I can do that. One is the trail system. Like there's a trail that goes from Waverly to Denver, Iowa. It used to be a railroad, so it's kind of hidden in the trees, but it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to go for a run, throw on the rollerblades or hop on the bike. Obviously in the Iowa summer heat and humidity that we get, there's a nice covering there of trees to cool off a little bit. The second thing is the W. The W is this shared partnership between the community of Waverly and Wartburg College. It's a rec center, right? So you think about like an awesome world-class Division III college athletic facility that Wartburg has, and the community gets to use it, right? So like, I love the fact I can go work out and run on an indoor track or hang out in the pool or go to the climbing wall. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Before COVID, there was all kinds of sports camps and things like that going on there. It really is a hidden gem. So if you're up here and want to get a nice workout in, absolutely love checking out the W or just walking around and seeing this wonderful world-class facility.
Next question. What is the best up to $50 purchase you've made in the last 6 months?
Yeah, man. I hope my wife is listening to this episode. I would say it was a morning coffee date with her. Really great. She loves coffee. She has trained my tongue to enjoy coffee as well. And so we had a morning coffee date recently. We just kind of caught up and just kind of caught up on life, and cost a little bit less than $50, but
I hope so.
I would have paid $50 for that coffee date. It was a good time of catching up.
So what is the coffee drink of choice for you and your wife?
Yeah, she has trained me on this. It is definitely a medium mocha, half the chocolate, extra shot of espresso.
Okay. Now, is there a coffee shop there or a couple coffee shops in Waverly?
There's a couple of coffee places. There's a coffee place at the college, another kind of chain coffee place. There's also a couple of local roasters. So my wife used to work at a coffee shop, and so nice. We buy beans from the local roasters and make our own type of stuff too, which is pretty fun.
All right. Next question is the book question. Besides obviously Making Grades Matter, and you mentioned Focus by Schmoker earlier. Besides those two, what is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
All right. Yeah, great question. I had a hard time thinking about this. I just had this feeling you're going to ask this question. And by the way, Jared, I have looked at your list, which is an outstanding list. I think I've read I'm ashamed to say maybe 1 out of every 10 books on your list. You've got a really comprehensive list. And the book I'm going to share is not on your list, but it has a huge impact on me. It's called QBQ by John Miller. It's called Question Behind the Question. So it's the story of the author, John, who goes to a restaurant one day. And it's a typical restaurant. The waiter's like, hey, what do you want to eat? What do you want to drink? The waiter's obviously super busy. He's like, hey, I want this. And, do you have Coke or Pepsi? And the waiter's like, we got Pepsi. And he's like, dang, I was really hoping to get a Diet Coke today. And Pepsi okay? All right, Pepsi's not okay. I just have a water. Sounds good. And so, brings John's food, brings them a water. A couple minutes later, the waiter comes back with a Diet Coke. And he's like, whoa. I thought you guys don't have Coke. He's like, we don't. Well, where'd you get the Diet Coke? Well, there's a grocery store, over there. You had time to go and get me a Diet Coke? He's like, no, I asked my manager to get the Coke for you. And so there's this huge story in the book about what it means to have personal accountability, and about how, as a waiter, dang it, we didn't have that. It stinks. I wish my manager would do it. He's like, I'm going to be solution oriented. And that manager could be like, dang, we don't have it. We can't please the customer. The manager was like, what can I do today in this frame of personal accountability? What can I do today to make, my business better? What can I do today as a leader to make me better? Instead of casting the blame on someone else, how do I take personal accountability? I mean, the old school idea of external versus internal locus of control. That book really solidified me as a person, as a school leader, to really have much more of an internal locus of control. I can't control the election. I can't control a bunch of other stuff going on right now, but I can control how I respond and react to it. So QBQ by John Miller.
Next question is the culture hack question. What is the best culture hack you have used in the professional setting?
Yeah, I owe this one to Sam Miller, my former boss. I think you know Sam. He's now the chief administrator at Central Rivers AEA there. He really taught me that little things matter. Sam was really big on writing notes to teachers and administrators. There's some really tough school board meetings. He would write a note to me saying, "Thank you for the way that you handled that situation." Or after an administrative meeting, he'd pull me aside and just say, "Hey, man, the way you handled that was really helpful. Thank you." And so he really taught me that little things matter. So for me, what does that look like now? I use this tool called Voxer. It's just like this walkie-talkie app. And so all of the students I have in class, we require them to download this Voxer app for a lot of different kind of instructional purposes. And if somebody just knocks it out of the park in class one night, I'll be like, the next day, I will send them this audio message. It's not just text, it's an audio message. "Hey, Raphael, you just knocked it out of the park last night in the presentation. I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you." And I love it because they can hear my voice, right? It's different than just an email. They can hear my voice. So I took Sam's idea of the little things matter and appreciation, and I've tried to make it just a little bit more personal through this Voxer thing. And so, if somebody's going through a hard time in class personally, they might reach out and say, "Oh, I've got this thing going on," or whatever. I might follow up with them a couple weeks later and just check in. And so it's a little thing, but I think it really turns into be a big thing in our world now of what seemingly is disconnectedness due to COVID.
Mm-hmm. Next question is, do you have a daily routine?
Man, I honestly do not. 4 kids, it is hard enough to get them all to school in the morning and tucked in at night. If there is something I do, I'm kind of a night owl. And so if there is something I do, I try to do at least one of these things every night. I try to write something or document an idea for something that has just been like on my mind. And so it might be just, writing a paragraph for a specific article I'm writing, or it might be jotting down some notes for a future workshop with some schools, or it might be thinking about a different approach for a future class topic. And so I try to write down an idea or contribute towards something in the writing world. But honestly, though, I struggle with the routine. I'm hoping that maybe at a later phase in life, I can get back into the routine. But right now, it's just something, writing or an idea, getting that down every night.
What is the one tip you have for helping others be successful?
Yeah, it's this. I'm a big believer in telling a few important people about goals. So here's an example. One year I ran 1,000 miles in a calendar year. It was a while ago, but I just decided to share at the beginning of the year, "Hey, you know what? I'm excited about doing this. I'm going to log my miles, and I just want to let you know." And it's amazing how if you share it with 5-6 people, how those conversations will cycle back throughout the year. And someone's going to say, "Hey, Matt, how's your running going?" Just by sharing that, not like in a bragging way, but just sharing with a few important people, that is a way of keeping myself accountable. And so I think it's good for us as we all set goals to share with just a few people so they can keep us accountable.
So you've got a lot of things that you're working on right now. We've mentioned all the projects you're involved with, the standards-based grading, the consulting, the presentations. What is the one biggest goal you are working on right now?
Yeah, so obviously you mentioned Making Grades Matter. That book was written specifically for practitioners, and it's there's a research base to it, but it's very much intended to be read by those that are practicing as administrators or classroom teachers. I'm now writing a second book that is much more theoretical, much more researchy. It's the intersection between grading and assessment. And so why am I doing that? Because as I go out and work with schools in the area of grading, as it turns out, many of the questions they're asking are not really about grading, but they're about assessment. And I'm finding that I thought I knew a lot about assessment, but I really don't know a lot about assessment. So I just kind of landed in this project to write kind of a researchy, kind of it's going to be a textbook is really what it's going to be for future teachers and teachers in graduate programs to understand the nexus between how grading and assessment can be used to support and communicate student learning. And so it is a challenge. Like I'm going to be spending a lot of hours over the holiday breaks here, like trying to dig through really boring research articles to try to create a foundation for this. But hopefully by 2022, somebody out there in the world is going to be able to read about the intersection between grading and assessment and how they can use it to support student learning. It's a mental challenge right now. And yeah, I'm kicking myself at times for doing it, but it's going to be a good one in the long haul.
So you mentioned you do a little bit of writing at night, but that sounds like a huge undertaking. What is I always ask authors, like, what's your writing style, or what's the habits around writing? Do you write a little bit each night? Do you block off 2 weeks and just pound it out, or what's your style?
Yeah, a couple things. One is to start with an outline. Just here, I got to know the kind of linearly or from a linear sequential perspective, where am I going? Secondly is there's a time and a place to, like I mentioned, at night, to knock out a couple pages. But that itself doesn't seem to be enough to get the job done. And so I tend to block out just huge chunks of time. Sometimes it's, hey, honey, can you put the kids to bed tonight so I can, start pounding away from 7 till 11 o'clock tonight, or something along those lines. As a professor, there's a little bit more time during the day where there's a part of our job we're expected to write, so I can do some of that during the day. The other little trick that I learned along the way is whenever I stop writing, I make a specific note on, if I had more time to write today, what would I do? And so that's kind of a mental, a mental strategy, because I find at least that whenever I start writing, sometimes it takes a while for my brain to get kind of back in the habit and think about what's going on. And if I can use that electronic or written note, it will help kind of get me back in that thought process a little bit more quickly, which can be more efficient in the use of time.
I thought up one more question for you, and I always try to give questions ahead of time, but I think you'll be fine with this one. You've made that leap from K-12 to college or university teaching. For somebody who is thinking about making the same jump, what advice, or what would you have now that you've got a few years under your belt? What advice or what questions would you have them think through if they're not sure if they want to make that change?
Yeah, a couple questions come to mind. One is, what's the impact that person wants to have? One of my biggest reservations was not being in the action, right? I mean, I love being a district office administrator. I love being in the action. I love working with teams of principals and teachers to help move an idea forward. I loved getting an idea to be approved by the school board to make our school better. I love being in the action. So one of my biggest reservations was, am I going to be in the action anymore? And I knew I was not going to be in the action the same way. And so for me, I had to figure out a way to stay in the action. And so that's why I continue to write books and to work with schools. And so, like, to me, that's a way of staying in the action. And so the big question is if you like being in the action, which I assume that someone does if they're in leadership or in K-12, how are you going to stay in the action? The second question is how are you going to stay relevant? And sometimes staying in the action is the answer to staying relevant, but I'm finding that there's a lot of areas of school leadership that I just don't really know a lot about, because I kind of focused my time and effort in certain areas as a school leader. There's some superintendents that they know a ton about school finance. Others, they're like, you know what, I got this awesome SBO over here, this business manager, and they do it all, and I know just enough to be dangerous. And so we all have our strengths and weaknesses, areas that we focus in on. And so kind of get ready to to go a little bit broader in that lead to higher education and be okay with it. And then the third thing maybe to ask is to ask ourselves is where do you want to see yourselves, 5-10 years down the road? Because at some point in time, I admit I'm not as relevant right now as I was when I first started, 2 years ago at UNI. And are going to be okay with that. And what are you going to do to be okay with that, right? So my fix to being okay with that is being connected with people like you, Jared, to be connected with other people that are, that might be guest speakers, and to invest in our future school leaders. I know that every year that goes by, I'm going to have to I'm going to have to invest even more in relationships with school leaders across the state to invest in our future school leaders. And then maybe perhaps the last thing is get prepared to take a pay cut. Are you okay with it? And if so, welcome to higher ed. Not a bad thing, just know it's there.
We covered a lot. I remember how before we started, the audience thing hear this, I said, we're going to take an hour. We're starting at 4:35. We're going to get it done at 5:35. And here we are, a 1 hour in. But hey, is there anything else that you didn't have a chance to share that you want to make sure the audience knows?
Oh, wow. Good. Wow. I don't know, quirky thing. My favorite movie is The Truman Show. It's Jim Carrey is a serious figure in there, and there's this other character called Christoph, who's kind of like God. He oversees this world that Truman is in. For those of you that have watched it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But Christoph says this. He says, "We accept the reality of the world in which we're presented. We accept the reality of the world in which we're presented." And for me, that's why we continue to do this points and percentages thing, because we accept the reality of points and percentages. Like, that's the only way of doing things. And also for me, so that's kind of how it connects with my professional world. For my personal world, for me, it just connects with kind of my faith, not to get too down the weeds here, Jared, but for me, because of my faith in who Jesus is in my life, like, I see the world a little bit differently, and that shapes my worldview. And it's silly to think about this secular, silly quote from a video from a movie known as The Truman Show. But we accept the reality of the world in which we're presented, and if we can see the world a little bit differently, it might help us think differently about school leadership, about ourselves as persons, about the relationships we have with others.
That's a really good way to wrap things up, man. Kind of bring it full circle there. Matt, where can our listeners connect with you online? I know you're on Twitter. I know you're on LinkedIn, but if people, a lot of people here in the Midwest know you, but where should they reach out to you at?
Yeah. So in 2009, on the whim of my brother-in-law's encouragement, thanks for us, he encouraged me to join this Twitter thing. So Twitter, at MC Townsley, Mick Townsley, if you will, on Twitter. And then my website is www.mctownsley.net. Just a place to I guess, connect and learn more about standards-based grading as well. So, but obviously, email address on there as well. Love to, set up a Zoom meeting or whatever it might be to connect with others in a more personal way as well. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for everybody. Thanks for listening. We've got a lot, Matt, and I mentioned before the show, I kind of previewed your show this morning and had on social media and got a lot of people liking and commenting and texting you about, hey, being on the show. So I appreciate you coming on. It was great to connect. One reminder for listeners there, we're getting pretty good growth here recently. You could really help out if a lot of you listen on Apple Podcasts. Just real quick, give that 5-star review if you think it was good enough. If you thought Matt and I were just a 2-star, that I can take that. But just take an extra few seconds, because that really helps get that word out there and keep this thing growing. So I appreciate that. Matt, I appreciate you for all your time. You dropped some serious knowledge on us. It was awesome. I'm going to tag like 8 people in the tweet later, because we talked about your brother and Nathan Ware and Nick Pace and Sam Miller. So a lot of people got some shout outs there, which is always fun. So Matt, hey, have a great Thanksgiving. Stay healthy. And I'm sure you'll be pretty busy with the family there.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it. Go Trojans.
All right. Thanks.